Welcome, everyone, to another episode of IT Visionaries. And today we have another one of our special roundtables. Today we have the Slack co-founder and CTO, Cal Henderson, as well as the Salesforce platform SVP and COO, Genevieve Weber. Genevieve, Cal, both of you, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Yay! Thank you so much for having us.
All right out the gate, we do this with everyone. I don't care how big the company is. You have to tell our audience what it is and what you guys do. There might be some young developer right now learning to build the next great company who has not heard of Salesforce, not heard of Slack. I don't know if that's possible, but it could be possible. Genevieve, let's start with you. Tell us what Salesforce platform specifically is, because I don't think everyone knows what that part of the business is.
Sure. So Salesforce brings companies and customers together. How do they do that? They do that with the Salesforce platform. Salesforce unites marketing, sales, commerce, service, IT teams anywhere with something called the Customer 360, which we will definitely talk more about. It's a 22-year-old company, almost 70,000 employees, and $26 billion this year in revenue.
Yeah, small little success story. Not sure
Tiny.
if everyone's heard of it.
Tiny.
And Cal, you are the CTO of Slack. I believe everyone knows what Slack is too, but we'll go ahead and tell our audience what exactly is Slack.
Yeah, sure. So Slack is a messaging tool for teams. It's channel-based communication that brings together all of the discussion and communication in your organization, along with all of the apps and data around the work that you get done. So it's for all kinds of organizations who build things together. And we are, 7 or 8 year old company, and we're now part of Salesforce as well. We've completed the acquisition this summer. So we're all now part of the same family, Genevieve.
Yay.
It was a wild, obviously you couldn't talk too much about it, but when we first met and you joined us on IT Visionaries a while ago, it was like right before the Salesforce acquisition. I swear your episode launched the next day. It was like announced.
Yeah, it was just before we announced. So that was back at the end of last year. And it's taken a while until we closed, but very happy to finally be past that milestone.
Yeah. And you both kind of introduced the company in this way, and it's exactly what we're all experiencing as workers today. For anyone who's in knowledge work, we are remote. We are working apart from our offices. There are some offices that are now pulling it together. That is slowly, it looks like it's trickling in. There's definitely some resistance to this, but regardless, you mentioned that you're building platforms designed to bring everyone together. This was hard to do when I felt like it was hard to do when we were in offices. I joke with my team that I think 25% of corporate America jobs are literally to take information that's available in one system and re-augment it so someone else can read it.
Fair.
Right? Talk about what you've seen in the last 2 years, because this has really been accelerated. This idea that we have to bring more information together. It's from more fragmented sources. We're using more applications than ever. Like this, and this doesn't look like it's going to change in any way, shape, or form. Continue, even though Salesforce tries to bring everything together. Like even Salesforce, you mentioned earlier, Genevieve, with platform, tons of different apps live on Salesforce platform to help augment people's work because because it's hard. You want the best of breed. Actually, that's the best way to phrase it. Is like you want the best of breed, whether it's e-signatures, whether it's inventory management, just like all these different tools have to come together. Mm-hmm. Talk about what's happened in your world on Salesforce side to meet this market demand, really, or maybe the forecasting the future. You guys were probably already working on. I don't know. I'd love to hear your opinion.
Sure. So look, a small thing called a pandemic has really changed the way we work forever, right? If you think back to pre-pandemic, if we can remember back that far, there was always concerns about not being in HQ. And for me, that was Salesforce Tower in San Francisco, this amazing building with, seeing my colleagues every day. We have changed our business model to a digital HQ, and that's super powerful and has allowed us to work with many more people than we were in the past, which sounds crazy. But with the idea of a digital HQ, and Cal can talk more about this, but Slack is critical to making a digital HQ work. And so when I say that, if you think about using Slack, you can now collaborate sales collaborating in Slack with a customer, getting a quote, or, marketing cloud collaborating with an agency about a campaign. Like all of that work that is now done, not in person, not in the Salesforce Tower, but is done digitally is so much better part of the Slack experience.
And, I'd love to hear your opinions here. Like why it was hard before. I thought it was actually kind of challenging even before. Like you mentioned teams and silos, like marketing teams working with their agency. Marketing sales is actually probably the best example of all time. You would think they're completely aligned. Right. I swear they don't talk.
Yeah.
I think, in some ways the thing that's going to separate any organization that's successful from those that aren't over the next, say, decade is going to be the extent to which they can achieve and then maintain organizational alignment. Mm-hmm. What I mean by that is, when you think about what's changed in the workplace for information work type organizations across all kinds of different industries, disciplines, is that work is becoming more complex. Work is becoming more collaborative, involves more parties, is more cross-functional, is more, kind of cross-business and between organizations. And it is not just the case of organizations being able to decide what's most important and going after it anymore, but the ability to change that as we get changing conditions, as market conditions change, as world conditions change in the case of the pandemic, as competitors change, as just the environment in which all organizations operate changes faster and faster. The need to change our orientation and be able to respond to that is more and more important. So organizations that can rapidly respond to changing environments are going to be at a big advantage. But it's not just about figuring out what's the right way for an organization to go, what's the right strategy, what's the right way to tackle these challenges. The biggest challenge is how do you get people aligned around that? And if you're changing constantly, changing faster than ever, that being able to rapidly get that alignment is the really difficult part. You go back to 20 years ago, and it was get aligned behind the mission of a company, and that's not going to change. We're going to do the same thing for the next decade. That's we're past that era, and we're into the era of having to rapidly change as the landscape evolves. So I think that what we see as the big challenge, organizational alignment, is really all about communication. And communicating between people is just like a difficult human problem. And so I think we see that as really being a core part of the product, then the vision for Slack is how can we help organizations gain organizational alignment in an ever more changing environment and maintain that, through that chaos.
I would add to that productivity, right? In this new work from anywhere world, we have no choice. Like the companies that Cal mentioned that will be successful in this new world, they need to be more productive. And like, when I think about that, it's like such a buzzword. It's like, oh, did I have a productive day? I don't know. Does it mean like I plowed through 1 million emails? Does it mean I crossed a bunch of things off my to-do list? But then I think about like my dad's generation, and like he's 75. And like when he first started working, there was no email, right? It was like I had somebody type up this letter, and then I either like inner office did, if anybody is listening and old enough to remember what an inner office is. But you like inner office, you use snail mail, you like mailed something. And if you think about like how slow it was to get things done in that, then you go, oh, productivity, like email, huge changer. And now you think about that in terms of Slack, and like not everybody is there yet, I think, but it is like the next gen, like, and you have no choice. But if you're not seeing your colleagues every day and you're all remote, you have no choice but to provide them with productivity tools.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
And sorry, Albert, and you also touched on this at the beginning, right? And it's about organizations are using more and more pieces of software. And this is one of the also like axes of complexity. Mm-hmm. And it's, I don't know about you at your company, Genevieve. I guess it's the same company now. We buy thousands of different bits of software from thousands of vendors. Totally. Right? And we're not unique in that as any kind of large company. Like mid-size enterprises, what was the survey a couple of years ago from Netscope, are buying about, 800 or 900 different bits of software. And this is the case whether you're like, all in on kind of a suite or whether you're completely best of breed. It doesn't matter. Even if you're all in on a suite, that's 5% of your software spend. Yeah. You're still buying from hundreds of different vendors. And this has enabled a bunch of things that we weren't able to do before. It's like enabled whole new categories of tools, enabled us to do work faster, more repeatably, with higher quality, enabled a bunch of things that we weren't able to do before. But there is a downside, and that is that work has become way more fragmented. It's no longer the case that work is the conversation that happens in the office and Word docs and Excel docs. It is work is this record in Salesforce and this change data in Workday and this case in ServiceNow, right? And it is, and the glue that puts that all together, which is the communication and the conversation that sits between. And I think, it's funny that you mentioned the interoffice kind of memo, Genevieve, right? If you remember the brown envelopes with the the address part and the name part, and the string, right? Yeah. But email was just a completely digitized version of that, and that's why it has the subject line and the addressees and the carbon copy, right? And I think that obviously we've had email in the workplace for 30, almost 40 years, and it's become the ubiquitous way in which teams communicate. But I think it's a mental model shift that one of the things we see the differences between the email and the inbox model and Slack is that, and Slack and channels is that the inbox model, same as the interoffice memo, is explicitly addressed. You think, I have this message, it's going to this person. And they're gonna receive it. They're gonna get it in their physical inbox, and they're gonna accumulate a certain set of knowledge. And if every interoffice memo you sent, it might be useful to these 10 other people. The information in it might be relevant, but I'm not gonna send them a copy of it because that's an imposition to ask them to read this. Right. And so information, not maliciously, but information ends up being siloed, and everybody has an individual view of information of the picture of what's happening in their organization. And I think one of the kind of core things at the heart of the kind of Slack channels model is that people working at a company or on a team or on a specific project, if we can get all of them to have the same view of that information, whether that is messages from people, events from systems, data in all of these different applications that we use, if we can get people on the same page, then it helps people get aligned, helps people be a lot more productive because they understand what everybody else knows as well, instead of each having these siloed views of what's happening in your organization.
Yeah. And when we're talking about employees and how we work with each other, right? And we can talk more about how we do that at Salesforce, but one of the things that's so awesome about Salesforce and Slack coming together is it's really connecting employees, customers, partners, systems. It's connecting all the things that are required to make a digital HQ successful, right? And, supporting companies in the new way of working in the art of digital transformation. I love everything that comes into Slack from an app perspective. I talk about I need Slack for my personal life because having everything one thing, I'm searching my email, when did I order it? Where is that thing? When I'm on the work side, I get a notification when someone is, at mentioning me in a tool like Quip, or for this meeting, we collaborated using a Google Doc. You don't have to really remember which tool is being used anymore. You can just go to Slack and find it. And that's one of the things that's been most powerful. So
one of the challenges I feel like all companies that are in this space building productivity tools are now facing, you kind of both have hinted at it. There's information and there's productivity, and then there's potential information overload as well as lack of accountability. So, and I want to explain what I'm talking about. I'd love to talk about how you both are attacking this problem. So one of the things that we see with information is information overload is pretty simple, right? You can really become inundated with information to the point where you don't know what's going on. The next thing is tools used to be you kind of hinted at it, Cal, tools used to be very siloed. For example, inside of Salesforce, I was a Salesforce user with VP of sales. It was very easy to follow from lead to contract close. That was not a problem. Our teams knew the BDR, everyone knew what to do, right? But then it's kind of like what you just mentioned, Slack was it had to leap a software, which is now the customer service team, which had to activate the account, and they had to do whatever they had to do to the account and troubleshoot the account and how to interact with the account. Then this is before, just to frame it up, Genevieve, this is before we had the case management system of Salesforce. You know what I mean? Because you're probably no, you can plug that back in. You can just plug that up, right? But there are companies that, if they don't have enough software budget, that they can't build enough of the stack, whatever the case may be, but there felt like there was a drop off. You know what I mean? Your team figured out this piece of work, then you relied on another team to figure out the next piece of work, whether it's a service or whatever it is. And there felt like that was a disjointed jump. It always felt that way. And so when you guys think about attacking this problem, because you kind of mentioned to it earlier, like the bigger the organization, it kind of is siloed. Like you're going to be focused on your arena and you got to be really good at it. There's a lot of information happening around you. You mentioned, Genevieve, already, productivity is a challenge. Like people feel the need to be more productive as well. And we want people to be productive. Talk about how we're trying to make that a smoother, more efficient process. Like, how do you see this working going forward? Because noise, productivity, it's all part of this. Like, you guys are constantly solving for that. Like, that job is never done until, I guess, work is just smooth and flawless, which we're not there yet, but that's the goal.
Yeah, it's noisy. I mean, one of the ways I think is with flows, like you just described, like, how do I hand off my sale to like my customer success team or my customer service team, right? It's automation, it's flows, and that's one of the great things that we can build. I mean, yes, we have specific use cases like Slack for sales or Slack for service, Slack for IT, which is probably interesting to many of our listeners. But when you think about Slack for IT, it's the ability, to intuitively know how to do things in Slack, whether you're connecting and integrating data, whether you're building workflows and automations, you're designing UIs. And so I think that is pretty powerful when it comes to reducing the noise, is being able to very quickly build an automation or a process that's actually going to streamline the productivity.
Yeah, I think absolutely. When you think about how kind of any amount of work gets done, I think from a software design and kind of tools point of view, if you think about the sales process and using Sales Cloud, you think about, there's like opportunities, there's accounts, you sign deals, you close the deal, and that's your system of record, right? And that's where all of that information works. But if you think about what the actual physical actions are of closing a deal, there's a lot of talking to people. There's a lot of like, okay, well, I'm negotiating with the customer. I'm talking to the deal desk. I'm talking to legal. Oh, a customer wants these specific terms. Again, I have to go talk to engineering to see if they can actually deliver this special ask. There's a lot of glue that happens between all these systems of record. And like ultimately, there's a contract. It gets signed. It goes into a contract management system. Maybe if you have one, right? You provision the thing. You deliver the service, whatever it is. But all of this stuff that happens in between is work, right? And that's just one example of a process. But for any kind of thing that happens in the workplace of any kind of like more than slightly complex organization, there's an awful lot of this kind of unofficial work that happens in between that's done by people. And it sits at that threshold of like, there isn't a system of record for this because it requires kind of messy human interaction. Yeah. It's not complex and big enough that you're going to bring in like a consulting firm and spend a year and $1 million of figuring out like, how can I make this big capital P process repeatable, right? But it's that kind of soft workflow that is a lot of what work is made up of. And I think that we see Slack and the communication layer as being the right place for that work to happen. And historically, it's just been like, back in the pre-pandemic era, it was you go to somebody's office or you go to the corner of the floor where all the legal folks are. And you're like, I need this thing done. It's the last day of the quarter. Let's figure it out. And I think, how do we, in the pandemic era, but also we'll get on to, like this was already a trend that was already happening, is how do we do that digitally? And I think the communication piece is the place that makes sense. And if you can do that in a channel-based way instead of an inbox-based way and keep everybody on the same page, it just moves much faster. So that closing of the quarter, that, preparing your quarterly results, whatever it is, if you can get those people more aligned and in the same place digitally, then that can happen much faster. And I think, the pandemic has forced kind of all organizations of knowledge workers to work this way. But for any sizable company, it was already this way anyway. Salesforce has the giant tower in San Francisco, but it also has the giant tower in Indianapolis, and it has the giant tower in Tokyo. And, it's already a global organization. And for anything particularly complex, already involves people all around the world who aren't in the same room. So there's already this digital infrastructure that's needed. And it's the same for any, multinational company or large national company. But even like more or less, if you get to having 2 offices, you have this problem. And I think historically, organizations have spent, and I know we were this way, even as, a company building Slack, have spent a huge amount of time thinking and worrying about their physical infrastructure of their offices. It's like, how do our spaces feel? How are they set up for collaboration? What are our meeting rooms like? What are the physical facilities we provide our employees? And have not spent nearly the same amount of time thinking about the virtual facilities that we provide our employees to be able to work when they're not in the same place. And that's this concept that we're calling the digital HQ. What is sure, that was our building, well, it still is our building, where people aren't every day. But what is the place they're actually coming together every day, whether we're in a post-pandemic world or not, whether people are still going into an office, unless everybody is there together every day, in one single giant room, then we need that same space digitally. And I think that, that is going to matter as much as physical spaces over the next decade as well. And that's going to be a big area for investments for organizations that want to have that level of productivity that they used to have in person. Yeah,
I think one thing that's super interesting and what Cal said was about the human piece. Like bots are great. And actually I love Slack bots telling me what channels I haven't touched in like 6 months, but there's always going to be a need for humans in certain processes. Like Cal's example was legal. And one of the awesome things about Slack and the platform coming together is that these notifications, like for example, the example you gave us, Albert, about, I'm a sales guy and like I close the deal and I have no idea what happens. Like, let's say your customer starts calling customer service and they're being hacked and they're freaking out because they don't have enough security. Like you want to know that this is happening because then you can go sell them security. Like, hey, have you thought about Shield? Like, it's great to protect your thing. Like, that's a, purely like growth play, but that's, then you could just get a notification that says like, this is happening and you can take action. And I think that that's pretty powerful in the companies coming together.
So one of the things that, I agree with what you're saying. So I work at Mission. Mission is a small studio company. We have 10 employees. We have contractors that work with us, and we also work with various agencies. And as Cal already alluded to, we have a lot of software. You would not think 10 people need this much software, but here we are. We got CRM software. We got sales email software. We have website tracking software, and the actual podcast players, they have their own tools that you have to use. Like we got to support Simplecast and all this other stuff. So imagine, so we can imagine that scale is just pretty crazy. I've been worked at big companies as well. One of the challenges that we see in the new remote environment is this level of accountability. That's a challenge, right? Because if something goes to a channel, it's like, well, who in the channel is responsible for that? See, because like I'll go back to my VP of sales day. I would have, when a lead record came in, I had a routing system to say like, hey, Cal, call this guy. Hey, Genevieve, give this person a demo.
Action. Yeah.
Right. And when you did the demo, I got an alert that said it's been done. So I felt good because my lead got nurtured. Cal called him. Genevieve did the demo. We're good to go. Right. But now as tools kind of transition to the point where we go in this channel methodology, it's not clear who's responsible. And I know you can build flows to determine responsibility. Talk about how do you think that's going to change? Is it going to become, is it just, are there going to be more tools to just, I guess, interconnect things? I know Salesforce also acquired MuleSoft, which is like a middleware play. Like, how do we ensure accountability? Because I've heard of companies that have, let's say, bad configs of Slack. Not that Slack doesn't do the job, but they configured Slack so like, hey, there's a lead channel and all the leads just dump into the lead channel. Like, I don't know if that's a good idea. Like, no one knows what to do.
and to be clear, like, if you have 2 people who are following up on those, that could be a great idea. And if you have 50, that obviously makes no sense. Totally obviously. And I think, like, look, there's, historically, a lot of software has fallen in the kind of category of system of record. And that still absolutely has a place. And there's, when you think about the kind of the lead prospecting, SDR, BDR, that's a business process that that works, it's not going to change, right? And if you think about the, customer support, if you use Service Cloud, use Zendesk, whatever it is you use, there's a clear process here. Yeah. Tickets come in, people claim them, they work on them. There's expectations that people pick up a certain number of tickets, do them in a certain number of time, however it is you operate. But there are so that's not going anywhere. But I think where certain kinds of work, is where interactions in Slack can shine, and it's the bits that sit in between. So in the case of the customer support process, you still have tickets, you still have that same level of accountability. But when you need to swarm on a ticket and get a lot of people involved because you can't easily answer it, that's where the collaborative piece works much better. And that's where it's like, okay, switch into Slack for doing case swarming, and then you're back into your system of record for completing that case.
Like a major bug, like when Netflix is like, exactly. Netflix is down. I'm sure that's like a big
deal. You need an engineering team
on that. You need the 50, not the 2.
Yeah, you need to loop in corporate comms. You need to loop in engineering, and the SRE is on call, and let the execs know. And if they're talking to customers, let them know, and get all of that information shared. Get everybody on the same page. And so I think it's not universal, right? We're not going to see a destructuring of all of these kind of processes that are processes for a reason. They're going to continue to work as they do. I think there's some interesting stuff there of how small companies evolve into those processes, because the kinds of ways in which Salesforce works internally, many of the things they do would make no sense if you're a 3-person company. Just obviously it wouldn't. But what does that transition look like? And how do you, when are you big enough to need a CRM that looks like Salesforce versus like you're keeping everything in a Google Doc and you share it with each other, or you're the only person and you write it on a piece of paper on your desk? And what does that evolution look like? Because even for any large organization, there's a bunch of processes with a small p they do today that aren't yet enshrined and have a clear way in which they do and aren't happening at the scale where they need to be. And so I think, when we think about the Slack platform, the Salesforce platform, it's, how do you start with something that people just do and have figured out, and then gradually enshrine it in software and automation to make it easier, make it more repeatable, and then eventually make it scale up, and scale it up to hundreds or thousands of people and make it super repeatable. And I think giving end users, in the kind of Salesforce trailblazers kind of sense, developers, the ability to go and build those things without having to go engage some big consultancy or engage some big ISV to go build that for you. But instead the way that you want to work, you can enshrine that in software and automation. I think it's huge, such a big opportunity.
Yeah, I'd say from a user perspective, Cal talked to you about like what he actually built into the product in terms of accountability. But from a user perspective, like when we first went all in on Slack, there was different pockets of teams at Salesforce using Slack prior to the acquisition. But, once we announced we're going to acquire Slack, we were all, okay, we're all in. And some execs were like, I'm not doing email at all. I'm just going to like do Slack. And for some of them, they were like, zero inbox kind of people. I'm not a zero inbox kind of person. So like people that like to clear all the, are you zero?
I'm an inbox zero person. Yeah. That means
so all these Slack can be very stressful for zero inbox people, right? Because you're like, I was having this conversation with her. She's like, how do you know when you're done? And I'm like, it's so freeing because you're never done. You're free. Like, you don't have, you can't possibly get to zero. Like you're freed out, so freeing. And like, that's not the perspective of someone who likes zero inbox. But the best thing is like, to your point about like being in the channels, the heart of Slack is like, let's say you miss something, right? Like most likely someone in there is going to get your back. Like someone in there is going to like give the answer or give you a ping or something. So like, I look at the channels as like support system, and it makes it a lot, more, it's just like happy using it instead of an email that only you see and only you are responsible for responding to.
So when it comes to develop, no, I didn't mean to cut you off there, Cal.
No, I was going to say, I think it is, you're totally right, Genevieve. And it's like, if you're coming from email and, as kind of everybody in the corporate world is, over a certain age, but most people, have been in the workforce for a while are coming from email, and there's a different model there, right? Whereas it's your email inbox is a to-do list and everything in there has been explicitly sent to you and is something for you. And I think it is a different model and requires a mental model shift to the kind of, because it's from the explicit address kind of push thing to the choose to subscribe to channels pull model, is that there is more available to me than I can consume. And I have to think about it differently and be like, yes, I am awash in information. And here are the things I'm going to care about. I'm going to treat them like my inbox. Here are the things which are like advisory and I'll read them when I can. And here are things which are just like, I might look at them or I might never look at them and I'll feel okay about it. Yeah, exactly. And I think it requires a mental model shift because it isn't how you worked with email now just in a different UI. It is a different way of thinking about communication in the workplace. And that kind of, when email was introduced to the workplace and gradually kind of took over, that required a mental model shift as well. It's, I remember in the like very early email dial-up days, it's like, what is the expectation if somebody sends me an email? Do I need to respond immediately, like within a few minutes? How often should I be checking? Like, what are those expectations? What are the cultural
Were you a zero inbox guy before?
I mean, like in the 90s for sure, but my inbox has been a disaster for the best part of 20 years. And it's, like maybe each day I might read some emails, but especially because I haven't used them in the workplace for the last decade. But I think that it requires time for people to build cultural norms around different ways of communicating. I think it was the same thing when, a lot of what we've kind of built with Slack has been heavily informed by the rise of messaging in the consumer space, which is, if you think back the last decade, you probably don't email much with friends or family anymore because you use text message, you use iMessage, you use WhatsApp, right? And when those technologies came around, it took us a while to build cultural norms and expectations around how people would use those. But now it would be weird if, like, my wife sent me an email. I don't know why she would do that when she could send me a text. And there's different expectations around how formal that is as well, and I think that's also another part of Slack we might talk about, the level of formality and the structure that comes with the email, or prior to that, the structure that came in an inter-office memo, right? And it's levels of formality. And the way you write email is pretty different to how you talk to people in the workplace. It's a lot more formal just because of the structure of it.
So
I totally resonates. Like when I think about it, Salesforce, we were using Outlook back in the day. Don't tell anyone, but we were using this product and we switched to Gmail and it was like anarchy. People were like, how can I organize my stuff? I don't know how to do it. It was pretty interesting.
That was a huge shift, right? Because I was an Outlook user back in the day, and Outlook users are very like folders and rules. That's
right.
And have all of these folders and they fly in there, right? And you need to organize stuff.
Hardcore Outlook users, they have more folders than like they have to scroll through them. You know what I mean? Like it's not even like visual. It's not like here's my priority.
You're not a power user unless you have like 500 folders, right? And then nested. But then, the Gmail way of doing things came along, and there were like two really big important things with Gmail. One was there's infinite storage space. So you don't have to delete emails and get rid of attachments anymore, which is like obviously like a huge waste of productivity in the Outlook world. But the other one is search is good. So I don't need to file my emails anymore because I'll be able to find them. And that was just like a huge change. It went from I'm going to have to self-organize to I'm going to have everything in a giant pile. And it's the same thing of like the shift from Yahoo, a directory of the internet, to Google. I can search for things and I don't have to have it in a directory anymore. And it's not curated. And I think that those, that's a psychological shift as much as anything else. And it takes time to understand that.
By the way, to your earlier point about emails, I will bet that most of your email, if it's like mine, most of your email is actually forwards from your mom and dad. That's so my mom and dad still, my mom definitely sends me a lot of email. My
joke of the day.
My mother-in-law will send me email. But yes, none of my peers send me email, and I'm sure when my kids get older, they will not send me email.
Will it exist? But that's interesting, because one thing that I'm curious about that I want to ask Cal about is like, when you were coming up with the idea for Slack, were you just like, I think email is dead and I don't like email and I don't want to do it. I'm going to come up with a new way to work. Like, what was your, was there a thing that we were like, I think we're onto something, like we have to change the way we work? Like, what was the source of the founding of Slack?
Yeah. So we actually started the company to make video games. So actually, if you rewind like 20 years
Mm-hmm.
ago, we started the first company to make video games. And for various reasons, that turned into Flickr, the photo website.
Yeah.
Sold that to Yahoo in 2005 and then tried to make video games again. We're like, we want to get back to the original idea. Let's do that.
Yeah.
That didn't work out. Turns out we're very bad at making video games. But during the course of that company, we were split between San Francisco, Vancouver, and New York. So we were like a distributed company. We were pretty small. And we built we'd like all grown up on the internet. We were very early internet users, very into kind of different messaging things, including IRC starting in the 80s, and then like the era of Yahoo Messenger, ICQ, things like that, AIM. And we'd always use those in the workplace as well. And when we started this company,
before anyone that was popular, like before,
it was just used by nerds, or like the messenger things were kind of used by kids, but not really used in the workplace, right? And we were using it in the workplace because we're like, nerds. And
distributed. That you had a digital HQ before a digital HQ was a thing.
Yeah, that's definitely the case. And it's like, but all of these tools had big shortcomings. They were hard to use by normal people, and they didn't integrate anything together. So we ended up building a tool set on top of, at the time, IRC to help our game development studio. And it was the people who weren't, it was our customer support folks or our artists, animators, sound design. We built a set of tools so they'd be able to more easily work on the game. It's like share files, search history, be able to integrate it into our payment system or our customer support system, or know when a server had died or a piece of code was checked in. So we built all of these tools over the course of 4 years of building the game. And at the end of that kind of iteration of the company, when we're shutting the game down, which wasn't very successful, unfortunately, we realized that this way of working together, it was really good. Like, we really liked that way of interacting. And we thought maybe other companies like us, we were like 50-ish people at the end, maybe other companies like us would like that way of working. And we realized we had a company-wide mailing list, which we sent like one email to each year to tell people to enroll in their benefit selection, right? So we realized that this was just a better way of communicating as a tight-knit team. It was much higher bandwidth. It got people on the same page. And so let's turn that into a product. And initially it was for, we targeted small tech teams, small tech companies. We realized pretty quickly that it works for all kinds of disciplines. It's a very universal problem. Works for large organizations. And then also that increasingly complex work happens between companies. It's not just within one company. It's with your partners, your vendors, your supply chain. You're doing some kind of collaboration. It's a group in your industry, whatever it is. And so that's why we then built functionality we call Slack Connect. Let's use Slack between two or more organizations as well. So that's a big part of the product today. But it definitely started as like instead of internal email, let's use this. I don't think we ever set out with the goal, like, certainly when we were building the game, we weren't like, I hate email, let's not use it. It was just, this feels more natural, and we just gravitated towards it.
Yeah, I think that we talked about when you joined us last time at Genevieve, because they were developers, I think they built the way this is my description. You guys built tools that you mentioned, Cal, were good for you. But the way you worked was exactly how developers worked. And developers are notorious for working on more than one project. They work for their company and they might have a side project, maybe with another friend. You're laughing, Cal, because and when in 2014, I remember when it was time I told this story is when I worked on a side project as well. We were going to make an application. All these developers were on it. And then we had to decide, are we going to use Slack or HipChat? It just took one developer to be like, I use this product called Slack. It works pretty good. And it's free. At the time, it was free. We didn't have to pay the $2 a head for HipChat. We're like, all right, well, let's just use Slack. I think all of us brought that tool into all of our respective companies. It was 8 people working on one app. All 8 of us worked at different places. Because you guys built it to scratch your own itch, I guess the best way to describe it, it worked really great for people who worked in this capacity. I mean, right out the gate, that's how
the great user experience that they accidentally built. It's pretty amazing. Like, one of the things that's great about Slack is it's so intuitive. Like, you don't have to go to like a 5-hour training to figure out how to use Slack. Like, when we all, stopped using email as much, went to Slack, it was a little nerve-wracking, similar to like the Outlook to Gmail transition. You're like, wait, I don't have folders. Like, it looks different. But like, you want to connect an app, you click on like add app. Like, and I think like Salesforce too is very intuitive. Like, when I first started using Salesforce as an admin in like 2005, there was like a few tabs, like accounts, contacts, opties, forecasts. And then like, I remember I went to run sales ops at another company like 5 years later, and I was implementing Salesforce, and I was like, whoa, there are so many more tabs. Like this company's really been innovating. But one thing that didn't change was like how intuitive it was and the automation that it provided.
So the next rise, though, Cal and Genevieve, is going to be consultants that figure out how to integrate this. Because, so this is, you kind of hinted at it before, is like, hey, now that you can, just because you can, I feel like I'm quoting Jurassic Park, right? Just because you could doesn't mean you should. And there's now easy to integrate and pull information in everywhere. And I think a lot of companies are rushing to do that because they don't really have an answer, because maybe they haven't thought enough about how they plan to work now. So there's the rush to pull data together. But like there's going to be a new rise, I think, of like professional services of people that help build your workflow. Especially for companies that don't know how to do it. Not because it's hard, but because they haven't spent enough time thinking about it. I'd love to hear your perspective specifically on companies that have a physical world as part of their core business. So like, let's use airlines, for example. Mm-hmm. Yeah, your ticketing center can be fully remote, fully digital. Sounds good. Right. But on the ground, not possible. You're going to need pilots. You're going to need people handling bags. You're going to need people fixing planes. You're going to need stewardesses and flight attendants guiding people and unfortunately controlling the crowd a little now. But that's like the new thing where I think I'm curious to hear like how hybrid work models, how software is going to have to work for hybrid work models. Gal, I see you nodding and itching at this one. I'd love to hear what you think is going to happen.
Your example, I think, is pretty airlines is pretty complex, but it's like every retail operation. Right. Every logistics operation. Logistics. Like
food service, pretty much every food service company.
Any like chain of stores, whatever kind of retail industry it's in, and they have a head office and they have, branches, and a lot of that head office can be virtual, right? But like, the person who's ringing up your jeans at the Gap has to physically be there, at least for now, until it's all like Amazon Go style or whatever. Right? So I guess that's happening with Whole Foods. But there need to be people there physically, but they still need to collaborate. There's a lot of information that flows between branches and sites or warehousing, logistics, whatever it is, and the information work side of companies. I think a difference now is that it's not really a change now, but it's a shift, is that every company, as like Mark Andreessen said, every company is a software company. There is like every company builds software, has a information worker side, over a certain scale. And so I think it's, how can you use the same set of tools for tying those together? And we see that, with Slack, where we have our customers who are using Slack in the field. I'm not sure which ones I'm allowed to talk about, but certainly like major US mobile carriers use Slack at their head office, but also in every one of their physical stores. And that's how they can talk back to head office to get, to talk to other stores to find inventory, or to talk to somebody to approve a contract, or to escalate a case or something like that. And it's, how does that, can the same set of tools allow people who are kind of in the field to, to have the same level of kind of interaction, the same like physical case swarming. I think that presents a whole bunch of other challenges. It's, the like IT in the field is notoriously difficult. People who are outside of your single sign-on boundary for your company or don't have company-owned devices, right? Or like, there is a device per store rather than per employee. And there's complication there for sure. And that, that's a whole different area. But I think we're starting to see tools like Slack be used more and more across whole organization for things like that.
One industry I can see it getting adopted probably faster than others, and I'm just making a guess, I don't really know, is I would assume casinos. Because casinos have a unique thing where, of course, at your average customer might be worth, let's say, $400 a night. But then there's a particular customer that's worth $1 million plus a night, right? And like the second they walk or even book a ticket, like I feel like if they're even looking at the website, like everyone's Slack, like the whale channel starts going.
Notification.
Like, like that's
I mean, obviously that's an industry where the successful companies are very technology forward, right? And are making big technology investments. Yeah. But I think that, the thing that you said about, consultants and the kind of, the GIs, SIs of the world are to help the other side of companies, the ones which are growing in complexity and need that help, but aren't necessarily on the cutting edge of like, we're going to adopt all of these tools bottoms up and pick the best things for us, which are still more kind of top-down technology-driven organizations. And that's, we were definitely early on. Slack was all about early adopters and people picking it up, trying it for themselves. I think the other big trend, other than kind of like mobile messaging that we attached ourselves to, is this kind of consumerization of the enterprise. And if you look back 20 years, maybe 25, the kind of cutting edge of technology was in the enterprise because that's where money was to be made for software.
Yeah.
Right? That's where people spent big. And then we had this kind of explosion post-dot-com boom of like social media, ad-driven revenue, and the mega companies like the Google, Facebook, Apple, bit of a different company, of like driven by, somewhat ads, but a huge amount of money in those industries, driving technology to be really, really easy to use. And most people's experience of technology before they go into the workplace is with the smartphone and the things on it that are incredibly easy to use, whether it's like iMessage, whether it's Facebook or Instagram, right? WhatsApp. And there's an expectation that technology should feel that easy. And there was definitely a period that was still in to some extent where there's this mismatch between the things I use outside of work that are free are really good, and the software that I use in the workplace that I know is incredibly expensive is hard to use and confusing and bad.
And
right?
gray. It was always gray. The UI was always gray.
A lot of solid borders. And it's like, because there's different pressures that and different considerations that went into building that software, right? So I think one of our approaches with Slack, and somewhat because we didn't know any better, because we don't come from an enterprise background, because we come from a consumer background, was we'll just make software that is really easy to use and for people to pick up, because that way we won't have to have a sales team and people can just pick it up and try it. And that's how Slack was for a long time. We didn't have an enterprise sales organization for the first few years because we wanted to make software that people could just use. And I think past a certain point, size of organization, that's just not possible anyway, because you just can't use software off the shelf like that. But also past a certain level of complexity or a certain level of, kind of being a traditional company that's been around for a long time, you need help with that change, and you need, whether it's, SIs, whether it's consultants, whether it's, customer success teams at the software that you're buying, you need help with that kind of digital transformation. It's like, on the one hand, I hate that phrase because it doesn't really mean anything and it sounds empty. But on the other hand, if you're a company that's been around for 50 years and there's a way in which you work and it's like, actually, God, everything's getting more confusing and difficult. And, how do we find our way through through this, especially in the last couple of years? Then it's like, that is a whole thing. It is a real change in how you think about operating an organization and how you think about business process.
Yeah, Albert, I would add like the examples you gave, like in airlines, casinos, like all this complexity between like hybrid, whether you're, you need to be in person with the jeans and the Gap, or, you're in a digital HQ. That's why I think, Slack and Salesforce coming together is so important, because like many of those, types of companies have relied on the Salesforce platform for years to develop apps, but Slack changes the game in terms of engagement, right? Because now, the pressure is on in this world that we're in, where you need to be able to connect to high rollers and employees and, baggage handlers, partners as well. And it's an approachable interface. And then when it comes to like engaging them, building apps has never been easier with the addition of Slack. So we're super excited.
Well, listen, I appreciate you both joining us today. It was fun hearing your insight on how work has changed, how you guys developed this application, how and some of the stuff that you guys are working towards to make things easier for everybody else. I want to close with this one question for both of you. All right. What do you think the next thing, whether you're building it or someone else needs to build because you feel like, hey, I need this? What do you think is something that needs to happen? And you don't have to describe the product, but like describe the problem that you'd love solved that's going to make work easier in the next 5 years. I'll start
Okay,
with.
I'll go.
Yeah. All right,
first.
go, Cal.
Okay.
What do you want?
All
What do
right.
you want someone to make you? Either you're making, or you want someone to make for you.
I want somebody else to make this, and it is right. Like we were quite a headquarters centric company, right? We had a few different offices around the world, but prior to the pandemic, we hire people to work in offices. They'll come in each day, meet their coworkers. We made the pivot. We're more and more distributed now. We have people all around the world, certainly all around North America, who work remotely and will never come into an office 5 days a week. It is incredibly difficult as a small company, even as a large company, to employ people in a whole bunch of different states and especially in a whole bunch of different countries. I think like the kind of international PEO equivalent of like, how do you make it easy to employ people everywhere and operate a company that has like 2 employees in New York and 1 in Ohio when they have all this, different employment law and insurance law and all that kind of thing. I think the advantages are huge to being able to hire anybody everywhere, but it's so difficult to do, especially as a small company. And I want to see somebody solve that problem so that, even if you're doing a startup, like you can employ people from anywhere and get the best talent from all around the world.
I love it. I love it. Genevieve,
That's good.
What about you?
Listen, continuing along the theme of like automating complex processes, like we didn't talk a lot about intelligence today, but that's one area that I'd love to, exploit in Slack. So when you're working on something like right now, we're in the throes of planning for next year, like how should we set up our sales team? Like what should they sell? All these things. I'm going into 50 million different systems and I'm looking up data and I'm like, what does this all mean? Like having the ability in Slack to actually like analyze and, whether that's a connection through Tableau or like whatever your data source is, would be super, super helpful to me. I want to go to Slack and like have them tell me the answer to things. I go into these things as like a hunch, but that would really help my productivity. So I want that in Slack going forward.
So I am going to piggyback off Genevieve. I know exactly your pain you're talking about, Cal, because we do it across states. We only represent ourselves in 10 states. I can't imagine across countries. Forget about it. Like I don't even know what to do, especially countries that require you to have you have a physical location. Like, all right, I don't even want to think about it. But I would love a tool in AI, and we're not there yet. I don't know when we'll get there, but AI has to get so smart that, because a lot of times in Slack, one of the things I've noticed is like, for example, in the creative realm, right? So let's say we are in creative, someone posts, let's say the latest video that we're going to launch to the market. People are giving ideas. They're throwing out suggestions. You're liking some, you're going to discount some. Fantastic. You got all the world's best recommendations. But now there's the information transfer. Now I still got to transfer all that information back to my I got to literally take it out, put in my marketing product. If I update a record, I need to update probably another record. I need to usually manually check something to say like I've updated it. When we get to the point where the AI is like layered over everything we do and is doing that for us, like moving, like as we do information, it's like, this is the record to put everywhere. I think that would be phenomenal. So imagine, for example, you finish up your presentation, Genevieve, and it just automatically updates the link to where it was and like notifies whoever.
People,
so
we're going to work our
like,
way out of a job here if we keep going on this. Like, we're not going to be.
Well, it didn't do it for you. It just told it just brought the notification. Like, but it was awesome having you two on the show. I appreciate you taking your time. I know that at the time of recording, it's totally fine to plug this because Dreamforce is around the corner. Everyone, are you guys ready for Dreamforce? I mean, I know that it was like, it's been, everyone we've talked to so far working in Salesforce is stressed out, but excited as well. Are you guys in the same boat?
Totally.
Yeah, it's going to be a fantastic event this year, I think. And very excited to see Slack being part of it.
Us too. Genevieve, Cal, thank you today for joining us on IT Visionaries.